Very, very good evening, everyone. Can I get a maybe a yes in the chat section if you can hear me properly?
Hey, I see a couple of my friends out there. Good. That.
Guys, just a request if you could just mention in the chat, am I perfectly audible?
You are.
All right, perfect. Thank you, Arun. Thank you so much for that. And we'll just wait for maybe 2 more minutes just to see if a few more people join us, and then we shall begin.
Hi, Arun. I see a lot of my friends.
Been a long time. Hello.
Hari, you seem to have accidentally gone to mute again. I'm sorry about that. That was my fault.
Okay, there we go. Hi.
Yeah. All right. Very good evening, everyone. So thank you so much for joining us today. And today we have, I'm very excited. So this is our second edition of, or rather second episode of the series that we're doing, which is called the Wellness Changemakers Leadership Edition. And the theme for this season of this series is how to achieve both, how to create empathetic and high performing organizations. Today, we are actually in the revered presence of a person who has built companies and built company culture from scratch. He's someone who has turned the fortunes of companies. It's one of the most respected HR experts out there. And of course, on the side, he's also a psychotherapist. So please welcome Mr. Hari Iyer. Thank you so much for joining us. And Hari is currently the managing director of Ephicacy Life Science Analytics. In the past, he has completed, of course, his fellowship from XLRI and a PGDM from IIM Bangalore, and brings with him 35 years of experience. That is, probably one of the most experienced people we have in this particular field. So thank you so much, Hari, for joining us today.
Thank you.
I want to start with, so we hear the term empathetic organizations, right? What is an empathetic organization basically? What counts as an empathetic organization?
Okay. So let me kind of. I'm very, very amazed when people kind of look at it with this, what we call as a question kind of a thing. Can there be an empathetic organization? Can something which is made of brick and mortar and things like that, can that mechanistic structure that gives us the concept of being an organization, can it be human? Can it be human-like, right? So an empathetic organization is essentially a human organization. Means that organizations, of course, is not about the bricks and the mortar and the machines and the things out there. It's about people, right? So typically, and by the way, thank you, Suesh, and thank you very much for bringing me here. And I'm really humbled to be a part of this series. So coming back, we tend to consider organization as a layered and a structured kind of system where we have people in boxes and we believe, and that is what an organization is. But organization is made of people and people are social. So organizations are equivalent to communities, and communities, the difference between an organization and a community is a set of people who are like-minded, have similar passion and a similar aligned goal, right? That's what a community is made of. An organization also has it, but with a very clear outcome basis. So empathetic organization is not what we call as a non-brainer. Organizations can be very, very humane, very, very empathetic. An organization can also be what is called as very mechanistic. So it's a choice of the people who build these organizations, the founding fathers, the history makers, are the people who actually decide what is the definition and the design of the organization. So that's what I call as an organization, as a relational organization, particularly given the context of where we are today. So if I quickly look at what, I mean, we were talking before we got into this meeting, I was talking to you about this guy called Dave Ulrich. Dave Ulrich is considered to be the father of human resources system and the man who presents is the most recent framework and the agenda items for what it is. And he talks about for 2021, 3 general principles, right? He says, the HR, of course, he talks about HR, but HR is about organization, building about people, right? So he says increasing personalization. So in 2021, Dave Ulrich surely talks about increasing personalization, where leaders treat individuals differently based on their personal circumstances. Now that gives you what empathetic means. We'll come back to defining empathy, and we'll come back to that. Lifestyles, age, style, demographic. In addition, personalization also highlights focuses on emotional and empathetic response to individual needs. This is Dave Ulrich. If I go back about 20 years back, Sumantra Ghoshal did talk about it in his book called Individualized Cooperation. He says every organization has a smell of that place. So you walk in and you know what these people are talking, aligning, and he uses a word called smell. It's there in the YouTube. If some of you can read through it, it will. The second thing that Dave Ulrich talks about, which is very interesting, is based on what is happening now. He says work is no more limited to a workplace. And it is now essentially what he terms as the values that gets generated. Okay, so it's moving, redefining the boundaries, as he calls, of the work from places to work. In essence, place is a confinement. Place is a limitation. Place is an input. Let's understand. What he's talking of is essentially saying people are no more going to be looked at by the input to the system, but by the output. The controls will now move from an input to the output. And we'll talk more about the values that is being talked of, because we will talk about the redefinition of performance. And the last, of course, which is interesting, is how do you harness uncertainty? When people and organizations want certainty, which is highly predictable, which is what a mechanistic structure actually brings in, the crisis that we have gone through shows us that nothing is permanent. Be it pandemic is also not permanent, but non-pandemic is also not permanent. Things will go cyclically. What we think is going to happen. And where does this come from? How do you look at this uncertainty? He says you look from neurology, you look at religion, you look at health, you look at investment, you look at military, you look at almost everything. And these practices are the ones which has harnessed this uncertainty. Now, having said this, organizations essentially need not be mechanistic and thus cannot be not having empathy. A short answer, short question, long answer. We'll also go back later once we start talking. And if people need, we'll give you answers about why things are different.
At
Yeah,
100%. But I think I was very astonished by, here's a book that you say has been written a while back, relatively speaking, and how it is all the more applicable to the current scenario, whether it is about, like limiting yourself to a place as a workplace, or having to spread that whole idea of building that culture and those values. And do you think that has become a bit more challenging right now in the current situation that we are in, wherein remote working has become the norm?
Yeah, now of course we are enforceably working remotely.
Yeah.
Okay, remote working is not traditionally new. So that is basically lots of people have done this, broken it, come back, and has been. I know the first company which actually talked about remote working was a company called, I think, Verizon, or one of the telecom companies used to be 100% remote. And then this was way back in 2000 times when we were looking at it. I don't remember the name. It may not be Verizon, but it was some other company. But the fact remains, remote working is not. What is making things different now is we are enforced in doing this remote working, and anything that is enforced against our wishes is always a problem. what is voluntary and what is acceptable to people. And if you can work towards making things in such a way that it is by their own volition, they get something, things are going to be very different. Okay. And that is what an empathetic organization is going to build. You are going to make it very individualized, very personalized by knowing what they are talking of and working towards it. And that makes a hell of a big difference in terms of an imposition versus the choice making, which is allowed to people, treating them as human beings. So that's what it is. I always say this very interestingly, organizations end up by giving and not taking. The take that they do is only with work, and that also with a structured kind of way. If organizations learn to move from a transactional mode of taking only work content and giving everything else to people, it doesn't seem to be the one people love. You need to build a relational organization. And what is relational? Let's also understand, what does it mean to be in relationship with somebody? Okay, when I continue to talk about this, I say, why should an organization build relationship with people? What does it mean to say, I have my partner and am I having a relationship with that person? One of the things I have, over a period of time, started understanding, though I'm still finding it difficult to practice. I see my wife is also here, so possibly she'll say, oh, he's bluffing. But the fact remains that a relationship, is not about giving something to the other person. I'm not in a relationship because I want to please my wife. I'm not in a relationship because I want to make somebody else good. Anybody who's in a relationship is about feeling good about himself in that relationship. Any relationship where an individual feels good about himself in that relationship, it will last. If I have to make the other feel good, I'm not going to succeed. It's a very interesting thing. And that kind of a relational organization only happens when the person in front of me is empathetic about understanding my needs. And we need to understand what empathy means. We'll come to that. Okay.
Sure. Absolutely. Everyone who has just joined us, just tuned in, just want to remind you, this is not the IPL. This is something even better that is happening at the same time. And we of course have Mr. Hari Iyer today in attendance. And just to remind you all that around the 7:25, 7:30 mark, we will open the floor to you for your questions. So, Hari, let's come to the second question. And this is something that we had sort of discussed earlier, I think, was that there is a certain skepticism. Let's face it. I mean, sure, we can put out polls and say, okay, is empathy necessary? They will be like, a good majority will say yes, it is important. But then I think it also, there is this side of a bunch of people, I would say, or a lot of people who will be skeptical about it, that an organization can either be empathetic or it can be a high performing organization. So can these coexist? Are they completely mutually exclusive or can they coexist?
Okay, so the question is, can this or that exist? It cannot be this and that. For whatever reason, we seem to believe that both of them cannot coexist. So let's do one simple understanding. What is empathy? Let's understand the empathy part of it. And then let us understand what is performance and say, is there what we call as the union of that, right? Can there be a kind of a set which is a union of both of these things? So first of all, empathy, let us put it very clearly. Empathy is the ability of an individual to detect the other state of mind. What state of mind is the person in front of me or the group of people, and understand their perspective and behave in a manner. Okay, now this is very interesting. Behave in a manner that is consonant with their state. So essentially, if I have to break this down, okay, and where does the dichotomy come? We will talk about it. The first one, there are three sets of things. If you read David Goleman or Goleman's book, or even there's another interesting guy called Paul Ekman. I don't know how many of us have done a lot of work on emotions, and one of the person at par with Goleman's capability, and maybe I personally believe it. He's basically done a lot of things on your facial recognition in terms of emotion. Paul Ekman is one of the gurus of what we can. He says, I can see a person and say, what is the state of his emotions at this point? Okay. Now coming back, they have kind of created three elements of so-called empathy. The first one is a very cognitive empathy, to understand and reason out the state of mind of that person and see what state of mind he is in. And it's a thinking empathy, which is associated with our thought process, right? And this thought process does not have anything to do with feelings, okay? And you must have seen this misused many times. So when I go to my boss and say, look, I need a raise, he says, I understand. And my question is, do you really? Because you don't know that I have to get this money because I worked very hard, and I know somebody else who's not worked hard has got this increase. And I know I have struggled for whatever. I have invested so much of my time and energy. I've done so much. Do you really understand? But factually, if you understand the state of that person, then it's called an empathy, which is cognitive empathy. The second one is, can I feel what that person is feeling? Some code in my mind. You know, when you look at a feeling is a body sensation. I hope most of you understand this. Either the body sensation is labeled as a feeling, or a feeling is labeled as a body sensation. Whichever way, there are multiple theories which talk about which comes first and which happens. Does a feeling come first and I feel the sensation, or I feel the sensation? Buddhists believe the sensation comes and the feeling is just a label to that sensation. So that, and it possibly triggers a memory, and that memory gets you the feeling, which is very similar to that person, may not be from the same origin, but that's called an affective empathy. There's a third empathy, which is essentially a behavioral empathy. Do I then act in consonance with that person? And that acting in consonance is based on compassion. Now, this is where the dichotomy starts. When I work in compassion, compassion has two very interesting things. Loving kindness is compassion to most people. So I'm in love of that person. I'm kind. I'm willing to accept. And let me paradoxically start saying a term which is not used very often, but it's a term which has been used as a part of a theory. It's called ruthless compassion. Okay, where you are aggressive like a warrior, but you are compassionate like this soft mother holding the baby, both of them simultaneously. So you are really not accepting the limitations and the negatives of a person. You're willing to compassionately enforce the change.
That's true.
I don't know, I'm sure I see Suresh, but we used to, if people who have gone for Landmark Forum, okay, so Werner Erhard is the man, and we will talk about Werner Erhard's and performance parameters and all later. Werner Erhard says, you need to push people to make the transition. Otherwise, they are destined and they are condemned to live their past life in the future.
Absolutely.
And that requires you to essentially talk of ruthless compassion. And this is where the problem comes in when we say performance is not. Now, let's understand what is performance. I think we need to understand performance because we don't seem to really understand performance very well. When we talk of performance is a 100-year-old story, right? Right from, we did talk in the A, there is somebody called Frederick Taylor who came up with a scientific management. He said, if one man does the pin clip and it takes so much time, if 10 of them do it by breaking it up, you'll perform better and you'll create 100 in the same time that this man can create 1 or 5 or 10. Right? So that's it. Then came in the next generation called Hawthorne Effect for all HR people and people who know of Hawthorne Effect. A guy called Elton Mayo came in and said, if you change the light schemes in the A, there seems to be something happening and there is a reaction in terms of improvement in the productivity of that. So that is where the whole performance happened. And over a period of time, there was measurement. Right from the World War I, somebody said, let us do what is called an annual confidential reporting system from the war, send it out to the Home Office. Maybe even in the East India Company, there used to be the. Now, some of them that we do here, that it's called whistleblowing in some sense, where non-performance happens. So performance has been, over a period of time, very well assumed to be an output that we need to generate, where people work with an environment and certain internal capability. So we essentially, when you look at performance, you say, this is the environment, this is what you have to do, this is this person's capability. With this capability, if you have to work on environment, this is what he will come as an output. And this output is measured, right? Measured in terms of saying there's a quantity, there's a quality, there is a timeliness, and there is something called a behavioral pattern that you need to exhibit depending upon what role you are playing. So you really, as a marketing man, you cannot be going and shouting at the customer even if you get business, right? If you continue to become bad to the customer and the customer is still willing to take care of you because the product is good, doesn't make you a successful performer. That's a context of the performance. One of the issues about this performance, which is not taking it, and there are lots and lots of research. Trust me, there is enough and more work which has been done, that are satisfied people better performers? Does the performance in this manner actually generate an overall organization growth? So that's where you see that people say, I have performed, but the group has not performed.
Yeah.
People say, and more people try to enforce certain things on that. We start putting, and for people who are statistics minded, you would have heard of something called the bell curve.
Yeah.
The bell curve is something that you force fit, and any statistician worth his salt in any place, and we are a statistics company because we do a lot of analytics, will tell you a normal distribution falls in a large sample. It cannot happen with 5 people in a department. You can't say one is sitting in one corner, other is sitting in the other corner, 2 of them sitting is in the growth area, and one will sit in the average. It doesn't work that with 5 people. If you have hundreds of people, it will naturally fall. So I'm sure organizations are now slowly discarding this so-called bell curve. I have come across HR people who don't know what bell curve means, who don't understand the underlying game, but I need to force fit people into so-called bell curve.
Yeah.
And that is what the performance is considered to be. Now, this is an interesting part of performance. But if you start looking at organizations where voluntary performance are done by people, it has invariably found, research was done by Dennis Organ in a book called Organization Citizenship Behavior. It's also called the Good Soldier Syndrome. Okay. The Good Soldier Syndrome. You can read it. Dennis Organ, way back in 1990. I do remember that day, 1990. And then, of course, he had a couple of his students. And then there's a lot of papers written on OCB. It's called Organization Citizenship. Interestingly, my PhD research is on OCB, so I can talk a lot more on that. Okay. So yeah, coming back, OCB is a spontaneous behavior. It's a behavior which an individual delivers to an organization at a point which is it's completely voluntary and not for a reward mechanism. Okay. Now this is interesting. So when you are an empathetic organization, which means you create, when people feel accepted and validated because people are understanding their both position, their feelings and their behaviors are also concerning, what do we build? We build a trusting organization. And what does trust do? Trust leads to high performance. High performance here as what we call as essentially an organization which has the not involuntary, but voluntary performance, something over and above, done because I feel for the organization. And invariably, this leads to organization performance at a higher level. All researched, okay? This is nothing that is out of the research. Now, the only question that we need to ask is how do you create this so-called organization citizenship behavior? How do you make the situation occur to people? Now, again, I'm coming back to a word which is not very easy to understand when you say occurrence. So we need to start understanding that when people work, certain situations occur to them. The circumstances on which and in which they are doing is occurring to them. How does it occur to them? In the normal process. So if you look at this, I did say Werner Erhard and Jensen and the Barbados group. If anybody wants to look at the papers, just say Werner Erhard and the Barbados group and say, look at their papers. There's this book written by Zafran and Logan, if I'm not mistaken. Zafran and Logan, who said the 3 principles of performance. Okay, very interesting. They say people already come, very interestingly, they already come with a pre-existing outcomes. What as we psychotherapists, or I mean, at least in my domain, called a script that is at work. So I generate my script from the age of 6 and I live my life right through my life with that script, unless and until I do my rescripting. That occurrence is what change of that occurrence, clearances of that occurrence is called rescripting. And people who clear their quote unquote standard term, what we call as understanding of their future, will create. Now, coming back, what is it that the leader needs to do? Leaders, when you create an empathetic company or an empathetic organization, needs to have a say and give others a say. And that is what an empathetic company is. You need to have a say, and you need to have others also have a say. Leaders need to master what is termed as the conversational environment. Organization needs to be conversational. Organizations need to listen to the future of their organization. The listening skill. What is the future going to, what is the future telling me now? What is the clearance I'm going to create? Organizations, unfortunately, don't work with empathy. What is the opposite of empathetic organization? Empathetic organization, the opposite is personality disorders, which see in human beings are also seen in the organization. Okay, you have narcissist organization. What is a narcissist organization? It says, I know everything. And I'm sure all of us have heard this. Don't think. I don't think they can participate in this. I've heard this even today. I've heard this. Oh, we will decide and tell them what to do. And I say, why will you decide? Why will we not allow them to decide for them? So this is a narcissist organization. It says, I know, I am self. This is making myself grand, aggrandization of the individual. From there, they deteriorate. They deteriorate to something called a sociopathic organization. Who's a sociopathic organization? The cold-hearted, calculative.
No remorse.
No remorse. Agree.
Yeah.
I mean, then from there, you actually become psychopathic. You become aggressive. You start you become calculated to destroy people. And that is what you call performance. Let me push them to such an extent that I will get my revenues. If I don't, then I will lay off people. Now tell me, is performance going to be achieved in that organization, or performance going to be achieved in an organization which is empathetic, which carries people, who create clearances, who look at the future, listens to the future? It's a call. We need to make our calls and say what works and what doesn't work. They say, oh, all theory. I've been told by a lot of people in a lot of forums, you talk theory, Hari. Is it practical? But I have done this, and I'm seeing the transitions happening. It's a slow process. It's not an easy process. It takes a hell of a lot of time to make people realize. As I said, even today, I'm fighting with my people. And I am very clear. People say, oh, he talks this way, but he's not as nice as he talks. I said, yes, I am very compassionate, but my compassion comes out of ruthless compassion. I don't want to be. Let me give you the difference between compassion and the ruthless compassion, or niceness. Normally when we say loving kindness, we talk about, I'm sorry, I'm going beyond time. Let me finish this up. What happens is when you actually create something very interesting, right? Let me give you an example, right? You go to a doctor. Okay, this is something that I learned at the Landmark Forum, and I have not been to S, but a couple of my friends have been to S when I used to be in the institute, and we had a couple of friends, and they came back completely lost. Okay, we used to say this person has gone bonkers because he has gone into a S program. So let me tell you this. What happens is, say you go to a doctor with a gangrene. Okay, the compassionate doctor, quote unquote, compassionate doctor, is the doctor who tells you, oh, you have gangrene. Let me give you some medicine, because if I cut off your leg, it will pain. And let's hope that you get okay. So you don't need to be a bad guy by cutting off, and you don't want to give that person a pain, and you don't want to hurt that person, but you are okay for that person to die. And you go and take a second opinion, and the doctor says, yes, your gangrene is there. Gangrene means that it cannot be cured. I need to cut your leg so that I can get rid of it, so that you leave. Which is the doctor that you would want to go to? Would you want to go to a doctor who says, I don't care if you die, I want to be a nice guy, I will talk to you nicely. At the end of the day, you are responsible for your life. Why should I make myself? And the other one says, I am going to cut your life. Ruthless compassion is about the doctor who is not necessarily nice, but he's good. He wants to solve your problem. He wants to lead you to the next level. And that is the difference. And if organizations have empathy with the ruthless compassion and understanding of your performance as creating clearances, getting people to make the situation occur to them in the manner that they want. Okay. And that is what it really is all about. So I think coexisting is a part of what it will be.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for
Very
that.
good.
Thank you so much. Suresh, like Puneet mentioned, we will be sharing an email with you after
Sorry,
this.
I seem to have lost you. I don't know.
Am I not
Just a
audible?
minute. Let me just see if.
Sure. So in the meantime, Suresh, like Puneet mentioned, we shall be emailing you these list of authors
Okay,
and
I'm back.
books that Hari has mentioned. Uh, so at the end of this session, we'll be sharing a form with your feedback form where we'll collect your
Am I
email ID
audible?
as well. Yes,
Yeah.
you are.
Okay, fine. Thanks.
Yeah. So at the end, I'll be sharing a feedback form wherein we'll collect your email ID and you can then we'll mail you the books that Hari is mentioning here. So Hari,
Thank you. Yeah.
at this
Thank you.
point, I would like to open the floor to audience questions. If you could please there's a raise hand option in here in Zoom. If you could use that, and I would be happy to unmute you and you can speak your answer out. In case you're more comfortable with typing it, please feel free to type it in the chat section. In case you're not comfortable with people seeing your name, please feel free to DM it to me and I won't take your name. So any questions from anyone here yet? So while we get questions, Hari, we did receive 2-3 questions from people who had registered. Okay, first let's go to Ishwar, who has just raised his hand. Ishwar, can you please unmute yourself and raise your question?
Okay, so that was the nice discussion. Fantastic, really.
Thank you.
I was enjoying for the last half an hour. It's a beautiful work. In fact, I'm working in network marketing and I am just heading the big organization, and it's a good team. And I'm learning the leadership qualities day by day. And this ruthless compassion, just I came to know just today itself from the Hari. And that really touched me. That really touched me, right? Because it shows that what your real intentions are, finally, okay, as a leader. But my question is, as far as ruthless compassion is concerned, the person on the other side must be in a long-term relationship with us. Then only this way of handling him can be successful. Because person in a short-term relationship, I don't think ruthless compassion can work for them, and they take it the way you want them to take it.
Okay, I do agree. I'm not questioning that. But so any mode of change process, right? When you bring any change issue, people need to start getting into a mode of trust, and that framework of trust has to happen with two interesting things. Like one of the things that I say is, it is in psychology there is a term which is very similar to your Newton's third law, right? Every action has an equal and an opposite reaction. In psychology it is called every action has got equal and similar reaction. I was just talking today to a group of people in my company, so let me explain this to you. Take this and do it as an example, and then we'll come back to ruthless compassion. We will come to that, but before that, let me explain this to you as to what is this interesting way of action and reaction. So on the road, I'm sure each one of us have seen road rages. I'm sure each of us have, when we are driving our car or we are traveling in a vehicle, somebody overtakes you wrongly or you have done something, and then all these things happen. Check this out at some point of time. However angry the other person is, smile at him and say, sorry, I made a mistake, and see what is the reaction. And you will see that the person slowly calms down. And of course, this was also shown in the movie called Munna by MBBS, right? So instead of somebody getting and slowly you start changing. So that's one thing. So ruthless compassion has exactly the opposite effect on that, right? You'll say, if you are becoming ruthless, you say, no, I'm not accepting this. I don't want you to. But one of the things about compassion per se is the understanding and the inherent goodness that you are doing it with. And it may take people to get upset. And let me tell you my personal examples. I've worked with so many people. They hate me for my such a ruthless, not compassion, as my sharp tongue and the way I talk to them. But over a period of time, they started realizing that after a couple of minutes, he doesn't seem to care. So people are smart, understand this, and they start realizing what he's saying is making sense. So some of them have got upset with me, left me, and then after a couple of years returned to me saying, oh, I made a mistake. If only I had understood what you were saying, I would have been in a better place. So ruthless compassion, over a period of time, people are not stupid. People tend to understand what is the basis from which it comes. Is it viciousness or is it from compassion? So work this out, do this example, say that. But there is also the other side of ruthless compassion. Ruthless compassion is an action. Ruthless compassion is a way you speak. Ruthless compassion can be on multiple things which may not directly be recognizable by the person. And there is, of course, what is called as nonviolent communication on the other side. How do you create nonviolent communication rather than becoming a violent communicator? How do you not hurt the person's existence and still convey the? So these are tricks. These are some kind of what I call as competences that you need to build. Not that I am an expert, but I have been learning.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for that. We received another question. Before I come to that question and before I come to you, Abhipsha, I want to ask this question that we received in our by the people who had registered, which was, as a leader, how can I overcome that fear of getting my, not having my opinion accepted by others? Why this question came to my mind was, Hari, you mentioned that how as a leader also we need to sometimes accept and say, yes, I'm sorry, I was wrong. So, that's where I think a lot of this is coming from there as well, that as a leader, a lot of times maybe it's our ego or it's a conditioning which stops us from really, all these things come into play. So, for example, as a leader, instead of being, say, empathetic in a certain way, we instead, our pride comes into play, and we're not able to really accept that, okay, my opinion didn't get accepted here. So how can that mindset change happen at the leadership level, at the managerial level, to bring about?
So let us understand the concept called empathetic organization or empathy per se. And that by the time we understand that, I said this, the opposite of empathy is narcissism. Right? I use the word and say that's called personality disorder from a psychological perspective of a psychotherapist when he looks at it and say that's a personality disorder this guy's have. So the difference essentially is in empathy, one of the primary requirement is vulnerability. The acceptance of our limitations as something that can go wrong. Accept that failure. Accept it as something. Yes, it didn't happen because I need to be better than what I did. I need to have had more compelling discussion, more compelling arguments. I was not coherent. Possibly the other's idea was much greater. I had not thought through the breadth and width of what we had to. And the moment of vulnerability comes in and you accept. Brené Brown, I suggest read this book by Brené Brown, or look at her YouTube way. She writes on, and she also talks on empathy in one of her YouTube. And he says, what's the difference between an empathy and what is the difference between what we call as the sympathy or the lip service to doing that? Is that an empathetic person basically gets down to the level of person who's hurt and feels that hurt himself, while the person who's sympathetic gives argument as to how to deal with that. So you are one level above. If somebody's fallen into the hole, you are looking from the top and say how to get up, while an empathetic person falls down and comes in. And that is what vulnerability is. Accept that this is something that can happen to me as well as to him, and I would like to go and be a person to hand my help to him at his level and not from a level above. Very interesting and not always very doable because see, as I said, we are already scripted. We have our default future. We've already scripted our future based on our past. What we have experienced as a child of up to 6 years old, we also believe that is what is going to happen even when we are at 50 or 63. I still believe that what had happened to me when I was a 2-year-old person is going to happen to me when I'm 63. And some of my behaviors, what is called as the automatic negative thoughts in the CBT, right, comes into play and says, this is how I need to react. I should hide my deficiencies, because the moment I open up my deficiencies, somebody will take advantage. Go ahead and start experimenting. Go ahead and say, yes, I'm not good enough in this area, but I'm good at something else. And that is also called the growth mindset, which Carol Dweck talks about. That I'm willing to accept and work towards the growth rather than saying this is the end all for me because I need to be the best and I'm intelligent enough to. Very interesting. I mean, as a psychotherapist, we come across this situation again and again. One of the problems that I have seen, let me tell you this, is organizations treat you as a linear substance, or people treat you as a linear substance. What is the difference between a linear and a non-linear? Every non-linear thing, I'm sure who are engineers in this group will know that non-linearity induces hysteresis. Now, what is hysteresis problem? The hysteresis problem is a residual energy in the system, which is not utilized. Okay. So two things happen. One, the organization loses out this open energy, which could have been used for performance. And the individual with the residual energy inside his system carries the stress and gets into depression and pain.
Absolutely.
Essentially, can we understand that there is a non-linearity and work towards creating those clearances or occurrences for that people who are going to perform in terms of the circumstances on which and in which they are working, so that our actions bring in an open performance. And that's what it's about. So trust yourself, say, I'm okay to be weak. I'm not almighty. I don't need to be an almighty. I will go with my pain. And I'll say I failed. So what?
Absolutely.
Difficult, very difficult, but
Wonderful.
yes, it takes time to do that, and you have to learn. I'm still learning. I've still not beaten it. Let me tell you this. I need to be, with all humility, tell you that I am still learning, and I'm going through each of these phases in a pace that possibly I can take, because it's my problem.
Absolutely. But I think you're so far ahead of so many other people. I mean, if you look at, even if I don't know how many of you know, if you look at Hari's track record, his previous company, which was Saskin, was, I think, chosen as the best workplace, back second position or third position.
The number one and number two in the year
there you go.
2004
Number one
and
and
5.
number two. There you go. And even right now, I was looking at Hari's current company, which is Ephicacy, and on Glassdoor has a 4.8 rating, which is huge. I mean, for a company of that level. So clearly, we do stand somewhere, which is so amazing. What you have achieved, even with and still remain so modest about this.
Thank you.
We were talking about these accepting these mistakes, and we were talking about how difficult it can be. Let's come to like a question that Arun asked us in the chat section, and right after this, Abhipsha, I will be coming to you, which is, in spite of knowing these benefits, why is it so difficult for companies, especially small and medium enterprises, or to adopt this whole concept, not just adopt a more empathetic approach to things, to work? What stops people from it?
So let's start understanding this from a theoretical perspective. Okay. So organizations, by the very fact that they've got established, and the founding fathers or the leaders are essentially achievement driven, right? And who is the person who talks about achievement in the psychological world? David Macklin. I'm sure some of you would have read his Achieving Society and understood when he said need for achievement, need for control, and need for affiliation. And I remember when I used to study at the Institute, IIMB, I'm sure I see a friend of mine, we used to have a dog whom we used to name as Naffy. Naffy was a name for the dog because the dog used to come and kind of beg for food, and she used to love us. Touching it and all. We said need for affiliation is the name of this dog, and Nappy became right. So that was interesting. So need for achievement is one of the things that all people are driven. After need for achievement was basically operationalized, Uday Parekh operationalized it in a very interesting manner. Uday is, of course, one of the, I don't know how many people know in this group, but Uday Parekh is Dr. T.V. Rao's teacher. Of course, both TV as well as Uday have taught me, and my respect for both of them is amazingly high. And Uday used to teach me in one of my courses, and amazing too. So Uday came up with his operationalizing factor of this need for achievement. He says, when need for achievement is operationalized, it gets operationalized in two ways. One is a fear of failure, and the other one is a hope for success. And if you want to see the antecedents, or if you want to see the elements of understanding fear of failure, is people who prefer not to fail rather than wanting to succeed. Okay, and the people who work towards hope for success are people who drive for success. Other way of looking at it is the error of omission is acceptable to people with fear of failure, and an error of commission is acceptable to people who have hope for success. Look at it. There are organizations which says, if you make a mistake, you're screwed. But if you don't do anything, it's okay, because you are not going to come in anybody's limelight. So who will be the first person to put his foot up and say, look, I can make a mistake. I'm daring to make a mistake. I'm okay to make a mistake. I'm okay to fail. Nobody will. And that's why this whole thing doesn't change. People still say, okay, what? As long it is not broken, don't change it.
Absolutely.
So if I... Yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
Lot of changes required, I think, at the
mindset level.
Mindset, and at that to mindset at a more like top-down level, going to the leadership, starting from there and bringing it down. May I, sorry, Abhishek, I accidentally muted you. Abhishek, if you can please share your question.
Thank you so much. Good evening, sir. It was a sheer pleasure to hear you out, and I could totally it totally resonated with my ideas, because last year I started as a psychologist. Last year I started working on my own research on empathetic HRM through organizational counseling, which would bring in more transparency and trust in the system and the confidence. And interestingly, the one part which was received very skeptically was why would a company like to invest more in a new, again, incorporating a new system where there is the HR personnel and employee assistant programs are also there. So why would anyone want to invest more? Because at the end of the day, an organization is perceived as a profit maximizing firm. So are we really it also made me question my beliefs that is it really a practicable solution, and is it saleable, and is it marketable? Will the organizations would really want to invest for a new thing to come up? So what's your views on that?
So
I
let
think
us
we have
understand.
already addressed some part of it.
So fair enough. So let me start understanding
you,
what is profit maximization. Profit maximization came into feature in the 80s. Understand this, which is what is called the maximization of the shareholders' wealth. Okay, and they started realizing that organization is not the only stakeholder in the organization, is not a shareholder. Okay, and there has been so much of issues which have been there in terms of, and you start saying quarter on quarter profits, shave off the people, get your profits back. So you are not really earning profits by your operations, but you are earning profits by saving money in a short-term basis, which is quarter to quarter. And organizations have started understanding that that is not the way. And the stakeholders are not essentially shareholders. Stakeholders are also what is called as the employees, the vendors, the customers, and a whole lot of people, which there is an impact. And there's enough amount of studies done to show that the cost of layoffs are much, much higher, even for people who stay back. The guilt of the people who escape the whole concept of layoffs are the people who tend to reduce their potential work productivity because they feel very guilty about the whole system of somebody being laid. So all those are fine. Now let us start understanding that you started talking something about transparency and trust. Okay, and building transparency. And what is transparency and trust? Let's start understanding. Again, as I say, I keep on talking theory because I am a researcher and I continue to try and see what is the practice element of each of these research. So organizations which are progressive from the sense of their productivity and their improvement, and this is clearly indicated that fairness in the organization or organizational justice is one of the leading factors for organization performances, right? And thereby the enhancement of the growth and the profits and all our whatever is being said, right? So what is organization fairness? Let us start understanding. And how do you achieve it is something that organization fairness conceptually has essentially 3 elements. Let's understand each of these elements systematically so that we know how they get implemented into the organization. The first and the foremost element is called, and if you want a way to understand organizational justice, all you need to do is understand how justice is. And I'm sure each one of us have gone and seen a movie where in the court, there is a court scene, right? Be it Pink or be it Nerkunda Parvai or whoever. If you are a Tamilian, if you're now, you must have Vakil Sahab in Telugu, you can watch it in any which way. When you go to a court or any other court, there have been old movies and there have been so much LLB, some LLB, this, that, all of that are there. The first and the foremost symbol, the goddess of justice, as we call us, has 3 essential symbols. So the symbolism has a very interesting concept, right? The symbols are a sword. Sword is a symbol that we will not worry about because it is essentially related to criminal justice called the retributive justice. We will not worry about it. There's something else, we will deal with that later. But there are 2 other justices, are the scale. Okay. The scale is essentially to also indicate the crime and the punishment needs to be commensurate. You can't put a man to death just because he has kind of stolen a bun because he was hungry, right? He's a thief. Okay, that's been proved, but his penalty cannot be a death sentence, right? So that's how it is. I don't know how many of you know, in US, way back when the Westerners were there, stealing a horse was considered to be a punishable by death. Okay, so the things have changed now, and now if you steal the nation also, it is not possibly you are put to death, right? So that's how it works. So yeah, coming back, commensurating. In the context of the organizational fairness system, okay, this is called the equity theory, okay. John Adams theory, you can check it out. It comes under the motivational theories. It will say cognitive motivation, equity theory, which says essentially that each person in an organization looks forward to what is called as reward commensurate to his efforts or what he has contributed, and he needs to get it. And how does he measure? Because it's not 2 things which can be measured because there are no standards. So the way he measures it is says, okay, for the same amount of work somebody has done, how much does he get a reward? So that's why people come to you and say, hey, but he didn't work, but he got a 20% increase and he already earns more than me. So he's got, in effect, more salary than me. And I seem to have kind of worked harder, achieved more, but I seem to be getting less. So that's an equity theory. And that's a question that you need to answer. Unfortunately, the HR fraternity of mine, unfortunate as I say it, because they would say, how did you find that guy's salary? That becomes more important, as it has become more important today in our system, that why did people write wrong things rather than what they have written, right? In the social media. If you write something in the social media, you will be punished. Unfortunate, but this is the reality of the system that we operate in. So that's the first one called distributive justice. Understand this. And we will come back to why distributive justice is not essentially going to be ever solved. But it's okay to not solve a distributive justice because it's always a comparatives and the comparisons are not always objective. And even though we may put some numbers and we may say multiply it by 0.4 and multiply this by 0.5, ultimately these are arbitrary numbers. These are not numbers which are based on fair objective criteria, and it can never be so. Performance by itself is not an objective criterion. Let's get that, and salaries associated with performance can surely not be. So then the next step we are saying is something which is more serious, more important, which is where this lady puts a blind into the eye. He says, you may be the king of this nation. You may be the pauper or a beggar in this nation. You may be a subject. You may be anybody. I will not differentiate, right? Everybody is treated in the eyes of the law, or the blindfolded eyes of the law as same. So that is what it symbolizes. In the human resource system or the organization, it's called a procedural justice. Now, procedural justice is I apply the same process or the same procedure irrespective of whoever you are as a part of the organization. Whatever hierarchical level you are in, you are, to me, same with respect to the, but organizations have created symbols for breaking that. They have, if I am a vice president, I go by what we call as a business class. And if I am a senior vice president, an executive member of the board, well, I go by a first class. Now that itself, rather than possibly saying, hey, we are all flying, it's a 12 hours flight. It doesn't matter you are, I'm sure people have changed it because it also is an indication of the narcissistic tendencies of some of the senior people. I'm not talking about Saskin, but I'm talking about the other organizations. Saskin, of course, is a very loud company of mine. I have worked a long period there. Okay, now that is a very interesting thing. And how does it get implemented in organization? You used a word called transparency. Very interesting. When a process is consistently used, you open up the process and say where the deviations are. Let any deviations be put up and said, this is a deviation we followed because of this very specific conditions, and exceptions are always allowed because it could happen. I might say everybody travels economy, but yes, I'm going to allow this person who's just recovered from a heart attack 8 months back and allow him to go by a business class, and he may be a vice president, he may be a senior manager. How does it matter? As long as I have taken an exception based on a condition. So that is transparency. So open it up and become consistent. That is called the procedural justice. Now the process by which is consistent. Now I keep remembering it. When I used to be in Excel, and one day I was just walking down the corridor and I saw this very interesting board. It says, when I learned to play this game, they changed the rules. And imagine when they change the rules after you learn to play the game, how frustrating it is. I mean, I'm sure a lot of people
have back to square one, basically.
Back to square one. The guy has come to the manager and tell me, what will it take from me to become promoted to the next level? The manager says, do this, do this, do this, do this. At the end of the day, he said, I've done all this. He said, no, now you need to do something else. There's another list of things that you need to do, because that is what my vice president says, because he has somebody who's done that and he wants to get him promoted, whatever be the reason. The processes which have been defined and consistency of the application of the process are done. But are these processes right? A lot of these processes can be flawed, and it can be, people tend to use it because of their past understanding, and there is a new scenario, things have changed, so we need to change the process. And how do you change the process? And this process change has to happen by not a collective lot, because nothing gets achieved in a collective lot, but a set of people who are taking a drive. In the governmental constitution, you elect people who take this, knowing fully well that they cannot be trusted. But then you still do, because it's a part of doing it, because you get money for some class of people. For some class of people, you need to say, this time I voted. This time I went. And trust me, I'm also in that gang, because at some point of time I started voting because I felt ashamed when I was asked in a large meeting by the person who was not an Indian. He said, did you vote, Hari? And we were talking about some governance and things like that. And I said, no, I didn't. And this was way back, 20 years back. And from that day, I said, if an Australian can shame me by saying, did you vote? I will never get shamed now, and I will vote. So I did vote. But then slowly it started changing. I said, why do I vote? What is the purpose? What do I achieve? The things change. But that is something that you need to understand, that when you are doing what is called as creating of the process, which is called interactional justice in the theoretical framework, you need to create trust and become trustworthy for people. So you use two words. I don't remember the name of the person who talked.
Abhip
Shah, right? Abhip Shah, there's two things that you talked about is an essential ingredient of a successful organization, and that is the theory of fairness in organization. So go back and tell your people that if you are not a fair organization, it might be that you need to reinvent the organization. Nobody likes to stay in an unfair organization, trust me. Yeah.
Hari,
Thank you so
thank you, Abhip Shah.
Thank you.
Hari, thank you so much. I think, seriously, I think I would be, I think I'll be echoing everyone's thoughts when I would say that this time just flew. We don't know how 1 hour went. And as like Arun had just said, that this session could have well been 2 hours. You're absolutely right, I think. And Hari, someone we can go on. thing. Just we can continue all night, all day, and it's a very vast topic. And when you have someone like Hari here, I think there's such a wealth of knowledge as well to pass on that a 1 hour, of
Thank
course,
you.
doesn't do justice. Thank you so much again for joining us today. Thank you so much for sharing all your wisdom with us, for all your perspective with us, and thank you again. Thank you everyone else who joined us, who decided to join us this evening. Guys, in the chat section, we have also shared a feedback form, a link. Please do click that and share your feedback. It will help us improve these sessions. Thank you again, Hari, and wishing you, a happy, a great week. And of course, in this time, we hope that you stay safe, your family stays safe. Thank you so much.
My only message to everybody is get vaccinated and be safe. I have done it. I've taken both these shots, and please do it. It's important not only for you, but for your family and also the nation. This is a time when we really need to come together and become empathetic to the organization and the nation, where we can support each other by getting vaccinated and reducing the load. Thank you very much.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. And everyone, don't forget to join us next week. We'll be joined by Paul Dupuy, who is the MD and CEO of Randstad India. So he'll be sharing his wisdom with us. So please do join us next week. We'll be communicating all of the details to you by email. Thank you again and have a great night. Bye-bye.
Thank you, guys. Bye. Bye. Take care.